Welcome to Perceptions Today. It's UK date, 12th of July, 2022, Twitter Space Chat 42, which is not really true because we're in a Zoom room now, with returning guest Anthony Peake coming to talk about discussing his new book, Cheating The Ferryman. And he's also talked about the eternal return, which seems to be the theme for today. Remember, we're recording this for the Perceptions Today podcast and we are streaming live to YouTube. So keep in mind, do not divulge any private information. Perceptions Today looks into consciousness topics in all areas. I'm your host, Paul, and your co-host is Ian D.W. Hawkins. And you will also have some upcoming events, which I need to tell you about, and I will rattle through those now. On the UK date, 3rd of August at 7 p.m, we have Laird Scranton returning for his 5th guest spot discussing interconnections to other domains of consciousness, which would be great. And also, second time returning is on the 4th of August, Eileen, Meyer, and that will be the Visitors and Third Eye Midwives. They will be held in Zoom and also live streamed to one of the other platforms. Other events are in the work spaces at the moment because I'm trying to work those out. And to find out more about Perceptions Today, go to all one word, perceptionstoday.com for the events, mailing lists, YouTube, Instagram, and much more. You can help us by actually getting on the mailing list, and I can keep you updated with where these events are happening and also to tell you more about what's going on. Also, you want to subscribe to the podcast, which is always great. And again, to the YouTube channels, that also helps us with finding new people that have got 1, questions, 2, or experiences, 3, who are researchers and other people. We can actually connect more of the dots as we go along. When we'd like to make announcements, we'll be telling you who's in the room, who the best people to follow, information that would be related to yourselves. And also, if there's any technical difficulties, we can actually address those and sort them out. And if there's any problems, DM myself or my co-host, as in Ian today, Anthony Peake's actual Twitter account, and also go to his YouTube channel, which happens Anthony Peake.1, not .1, just Anthony Peake 1. Right. And if you want to be involved more with the account, follow anybody else who's in the room that we've been mentioning in this Zoom place. So as we're live on YouTube, it would be great if you could subscribe and also comment, I have subscribed, and we will actually reply to you. Now, Anthony, I have to say, for the belief that you've put into this project from the very beginning, and also you're returning for the 5th time as well, it's been fantastic because with other people, this actual community has grown so much, so fast, and we've learned so much in how to connect different dots and understand other people as we've been going along. And as most people know, Anthony Peake has actually written 12 books. He's spoken around the world and also has been on many podcasts. And it's my great pleasure to hand over to yourself, Anthony.
Hello, wonderful again, Paul. Thank you very much. As you know, we have this running idea about the archons and how the archons tend to get in the way and they manipulate things. Of course, that's not the case. What it is normally to do with the fact that we're just trying to deal with some quite complex software issues here. And may I thank you, Paul, for your hard work in this particular case and how helpful it is to me to be able to talk to people in this way. So yes, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to switch from my headphones to the normal speaker if I can, because the headphones are it's slightly rumbling in my ears a bit. So if you just bear with me for a second. Okay, can you hear me now, Paul?
I can. Sorry for the delay. I was swapping and looking at screens at the same time. So yes, it's all working
fine.
Okay,
that's fine. And I can hear you. That's just easier for me to speak. It's quite disturbing hearing your own feedback coming through. But yes, I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us here. And I'm hoping that this will become a regular event and it will have the opportunity for my readers to talk more about my work. Now, my new book, Cheating the Ferryman, was released in the UK on the 1st of June. And it was released in all formats, from paperback to Audible, with me reading it, and to Kindle as well. And it's doing phenomenally well. I mean, a few weeks ago, about 3 or 4 days ago, the Audible version was at number 15 on 2 or 3 separate categories, bestsellers on Amazon UK. And it is released in America on the 1st of July, again in all 3 formats. So if you can check it out, you might find it quite interesting. But the opportunity today is to talk about the themes in the new book, and the themes that I have discussed in my previous writings, but this book is the opportunity to bring together some of these ideas in a more constructive and scientific way than I've done in my earlier works. So if anybody has any questions, observations, or thoughts, particularly on the concept of the eternal return or the eternal recurrence, please let me know. So over to you guys.
So with the way that you might be discussing some of the things today, I normally have, and you've seen me use it before, that I will break into other people's conversations when I think there is a connection point for this, which is great. Has anybody had the chance to either read the back cover or seen Anthony Peake's book or listened to even the small snippet he's put on other places? Just looking for hands.
I have, actually. Very sorry. Thank you for sending me the book, though, Anthony. I really appreciate that. But yeah, it's like number 10 on a massive list of books that I've got to read, so I've not been around to it yet.
Well, that's terrific to hear. So, well, maybe I can just give a very brief.
Hello, has the audio gone? Have we lost everything?
Yeah, he cut out.
Okay, they're all trying to get us now. That's always the way. So what I'm going to do is see what happens next. I think that's where Anthony lives. The world is just trying to stop him from doing things at this present time. I'm now looking at messages to see if there's anything there. Anthony's disappeared. He'll come back, I'm sure. Anyway, it's really nice that you've been persevering with the fact that we're going through issues at this present time. Oh, he's back again now.
Hello, I just got cut off again.
Yeah, I'm just quite impressed.
It's the Archons are quite extraordinary sometimes as to how they do these things, but one of those things.
Yeah, today's episode will be hello, goodbye, and thank you for turning up, because we've had
it will, I think. I do rather have this strong feeling that whatever we try to do today, I have a saying, it's like trying to get through a doorway with a javelin through your head. And sometimes I feel this in terms of these broadcasts that we do. I'm sure it is entirely coincidental, but it does seem to happen a lot. And it is possible that I suffer from the Wolfgang Pauli effect. And I don't know if anybody's ever heard of this, but there's the very famous quantum physicist called Wolfgang Pauli, who was a fascinating guy and actually worked for a time with Carl Gustav Jung on the areas of synchronicity. And Pauli had a reputation for causing problems in laboratories, and it became known as the Pauli effect, and it became a running joke with the students who worked with him. And there was one curious incident in Austria when there was a laboratory working on a particular experiment, and all the experiment failed, all the lighting went off and everything else as well. And people jokingly said, Wolfgang Pauli must be around somewhere. So one of the scientists later that evening telephoned Pauli to say that this had happened. And Pauli pointed out that he happened to be going through that very town on a train when that incident took place. So clearly there are some people that technology doesn't tend to like for one reason or another. So maybe I'm one of those. But I was just explaining just very, very quickly about the concept of cheating the ferryman and why I use it. And it goes back to the ancient Greek tradition. When somebody died, a small coin called an obulus would be placed underneath the tongue of the corpse, or 2 obuli would be placed on the eyes. And the reason being because they had great fear of dead people, and they didn't want the dead people to be able to find their way back to normal reality. But the other reason that the coins were there was when the person found themselves in the land of the dead as a shade, they would find themselves on the edge of the river Styx, and through the darkness would come Charon the boatman. And these coins would be used as a payment for Charon the boatman to take the shade across to the land of the dead. Now, in my work, I suggest that we cheat the ferryman. We never actually cross the Styx, because something very, very peculiar, but very, very consistent happens in the human brain at the point of death. And this is why I call the concept cheating the ferryman. There's a direct allusion here to ancient Greek beliefs and myths, because you'll find throughout my work, I'm quite fascinated by Greece and Greek myths and Greek mythology. And I feel there's a lot of truths within Greek mythology. And of course, one of the more interesting beliefs that the ancient Greeks had, or particularly a group of ancient Greeks called the Stoics, had a belief on something they call the eternal return or the eternal recurrence. And that is, in fact, that we will live our lives again many, many times. And I think it was Epictetus that turned around and said, in one of his famous quotations, when he turned around and he said, Socrates will be tried many, many times. And every time the outcome will be similar or sometimes dissimilar. This is the whole concept that I'm working with. So have anybody got any general comments or questions on that to start with?
Can I hear that term again? The eternal what?
Right, there's two things. It's called the eternal return or the eternal recurrence. Now, the eternal return was a concept that is most famously known by the writings of Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher. And Nietzsche argued that in an infinite universe, if the universe is infinite in time and space, and there is a finite number of particles within the universe, it is logical to conclude that in an infinite number of time, there will be an infinite number of positions that all those subatomic particles can move into. And indeed, every event will be recreated an infinite number of times. And this is effectively what he argued in his famous book, The Gay Science. And in it, he argued that we all live our lives over and over again. But Nietzsche argued you live the same life, an identical life, over and over again. And it was a very subtle argument he used, because he said, initially it sounds incredibly depressing, but then if you realize that you're going to live this life over and over again, it means that you will strongly evaluate the outcome of every action that you do within this life, because you know that you will live it time and time and time again. So that's very much the eternal return occurrence and the eternal return. The eternal return is subtly different, but it's very similar. And again, there was a Russian philosopher by the name of Peter Ouspensky, and Ouspensky was very interested in the idea that we live our lives over and over again. But none of these guys really did the science of this concept. Now, it's also a concept that can be found, as I said earlier on, with the Stoics, and it's also found in a lot of traditional cultures. And in the book, I discuss the cultures and the philosophies behind the idea of the eternal return and the eternal recurrence. People such as Martin Heidegger, various other individuals were very interested in this. And there's a famous Romanian anthropologist called Mircea Eliade, who wrote a book called The Eternal Return. And he discusses this in great detail, how in traditional belief systems is the idea that when we die, we're not reincarnated as other people. We are reincarnated as ourselves to live our lives again. And that's the central concept of the book. So I hope that made a little bit of sense there.
Yeah, that was fantastic. That's actually kind of where I've been going with my, I don't know, theology. There's clearly something going on, you know.
Miro, can you tell us a little bit about what your philosophy is and where you're coming from and where you're going to on this?
That's Fred.
Oh,
though.
man.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. No, it's okay.
Okay.
I feel like my purpose here on this plane is to seek the truth, like the universal truth. And I'm basically doing what Paul is doing I'm like a microcosm of what Paul is doing. So I feel as though now, with the resources that I have through people, through my experiences, through everything, I'm starting to lean more towards reincarnation and the fact that you're saying we live the same life repeatedly. It's definitely something to consider, because I don't feel like I don't have that like past life experience. I feel like I'm a fresh soul. and I'm like kind of going through this whole human experience, you know, for the first time. And I feel like that's why there's so much novelty to it. I'm definitely gonna check out your book. I've seen you in a couple spaces. I've only been in a couple that you've been in, and it's all very, very fascinating, very vast, and definitely just searching for answers. And obviously, that's all subjective, but I feel like I'm on the right path.
Oh, definitely, Fred. You should also, as I said before, check out Anthony Peake, one word with the one on the end, at YouTube for lots of content.
Well, I think one of the things here that is, can you hear me, by the way? Because my mic just flicked from one to the other.
Everything's going well. Once you've finished, you can obviously bring Lexi in.
Okay. Well, just to point out, it's a very interesting idea, the parallels between my hypothesis and reincarnation. Again, you're probably not aware of this, but one of my 12 books, I wrote a book called The Immortal Mind with Professor Irvin Laszlo. And this was a review of evidence for survival of consciousness after death, or the idea that consciousness is some form of a field. And in it, I did extensive research into reincarnation. And indeed, at one point, I was planning to write a book on reincarnation. And although I find reincarnation quite intriguing, and the subjective evidence for reincarnation from the idea of hypnotic regression and past life reviews and everything does seem to be fairly strong on the surface, it for me doesn't make any rational sense. It doesn't make any scientific sense. And indeed, in many ways, doesn't make any logical sense to me. And I'm of the conclusion that what is taking place here is when people have past life memories and past life recall, what they're in fact doing is attuning in when they are under hypnotic conditions or when they are in certain memory conditions. They attune into the greater unconsciousness of humanity, something I call the Uberdaemon. The idea that there is a collective experiential field out there that contains the experiences of everybody. And under certain circumstances, maybe in out-of-body experiences, maybe in hypnagogic states, maybe when we take mind-altering drugs such as dimethyltryptamine, we attune into that greater field of information. Now, this means effectively that somebody can, under those circumstances, when they're, for instance, hypnotized, recall the life of somebody else. And they can recall it in a degree of detail. Now, the reason I'm saying is that I work closely with two or three professional regressionists who actually take people back into past lives. And they are of a similar opinion to myself, that what is happening is we're attuning into something a little more interesting here. Now, the reason I have issues with reincarnation is that, and I say this at the start of the book, that I don't quite understand, the mechanism, how it is that when you die, your soul leaves your body and then arbitrarily ends up in another body that could be in another time and another location, could be in a different part of the world, could even be reincarnated as an animal or an insect. Now, firstly, I don't know how the process works as to how that is selected. I don't know who is making the decision as to how your consciousness is reborn. But more importantly, if reincarnation and we are developing and becoming better human beings by being reincarnated, I don't understand why the vast majority of human beings do not recall any of their previous lives. Because surely in order for us to develop, we have to be in a position whereby we know the errors we made in our last lives. You know, there's this famous saying to learn by one's mistakes. Now, reincarnation completely nullifies that, because you can't learn by your mistakes. And when you're reborn as somebody totally different. Now, think about this for a second. It means that in your life, you have loved people. You have your parents, your children, your friends. In reincarnation, you will never, ever meet them again. Ever. You may meet them if they're reincarnated as somebody else, but they're somebody else. They're not you. They're not them. They're in a different body or at a different time scale and everything else. Whereas Cheating the Ferryman suggests quite precisely that you will live your life again as you, and if you wish, you can meet all of the people, all of your loved ones again, which means that you never lose your parents after they die. You know, they're going to be always with you throughout infinite lives. And in which case this means that I find that very rewarding, because I don't want to lose the people I love in this life. I want to meet them again. I want to be able to say I'm sorry when I did things that I shouldn't have done. So in many ways, Cheating the Ferryman argues that it's a growth thing, it's a developmental thing, and over a myriad of lives, we eventually live the perfect life. And I'll make the final point here, and of course most of us these days, when we play third-person computer games, we know this principle. This is what a computer game is, isn't it? You're living in a virtual reality computer game of your own life that has the outcome of every decision you can possibly make always programmed in the program. And not only that, but, and this is profoundly important, that the decisions made by all your ancestors, each one of your ancestors made millions of decisions in their lives to emigrate somewhere else. Your parents could have chosen to emigrate to Australia, as my parents were planning to do. So there's a version of me and a life I can live where I went down and I was born in Tasmania. But you take it to your grandparents, to your great-grandparents. People emigrate, they move around. And all these lives and all these potentialities are all in there for you to explore in a virtual reality game of your life. What I call the Bohemian IMAX. I hope that made sense.
It does so much. I mean, when you go through it and think about just the variations, again, it comes down to even, I think you're going to even base it on cellular level, that you could just have one out of sync gives you that one more possibility that, for example, even if there's one hair that wasn't to the right of, say, your wrist joint, it was to the left. That gives you another variation of a whole lifestyle, doesn't it?
Yeah. And of course, this then gets over the major argument that people turn around to me when they say, yes, I find your idea interesting, but I find it incredibly depressing because it means these children that die at 6 years old of leukemia. Well, there will be a universe where that child didn't die of leukemia at 6 years old and lived a full life. You know, and I find that incredibly liberating. It means it's a tragedy when a child dies, of course it is, but there will be an alternate reality whereby that child, will survive. Now, the difference between myself and most people that write on this subject, and I keep stressing this, is these things I'm saying now, I'm not saying because I've experienced them. I'm not saying it's because I've read in books that people have had these experiences. Although I do cite examples of people describing what I'm describing here. I do the science. My starting point is and always will be the science. There is nothing I have said so far that I don't support by peer-reviewed academic papers. And that is profoundly important. As Marcelli Truey said many, many years ago, extraordinary claims need extraordinary proofs. And I am pretty damn sure I am the only writer in my field that is doing that. I present you with the evidence, I present you with the papers, and I say, go away, guys, and come to your own conclusions. And that's why this group could be so dynamic. Because when you've read the book, I want your feedback. I want you to say, I don't quite get this. And you might say to me that, I've read a paper that contradicts your idea of the Unhuru effect, for example. And that's great. And if there is something that contradicts it, I will go away and I will amend my position. Because that's what it's about. It's about us together trying to understand the greatest mystery of all, what happens to consciousness at the point of death.
Oh, definitely. Things are so fluid. Everything changes as you go along. And if you have that standard viewpoint that there couldn't be slightly an improvement or a little bit of change coming, then you become a problem at that point, don't you, in your own mind? It just doesn't allow you to connect to other theories and also ways of exploring those thoughts, I feel.
I think the danger is that what we all do, we're all programmed by our background and our education and whatever. And these colour our abilities to evaluate facts from fiction and everything else. And it is so important that we try to be as objective as we possibly can. I mean, my writing is not because I'm trying to prove anything. In fact, on the contrary, when I wrote my first book, I didn't know where I was going with it. I had no intention of writing a book on near-death experiences. I wanted to understand what was going on with déjà vu. So for me, the whole Cheating the Ferryman hypothesis, I found it. I wasn't looking for it. In other words, I don't go out to try and find evidence for my position. The evidence came to me. And I've argued many times, and I've used the example, I felt like I was Frederick Schliemann when he was discovering the city of Troy, the archaeologist. And I felt I wasn't excavating, and I was discovering different levels of reality and different levels of experience and different levels of proof. And that's where I came from. So some people criticize me and turn around and say, oh, Anthony Peake changes his mind. Well, that's what it's all about. You know, if you never change your mind, it means that your mind is already made up. So you cease being a scientist, you cease being an objective philosopher, and you become somebody just seeking reinforcement of your own political or your own beliefs. I don't do that. I've noticed there's a few hands up. Paul,
Yep.
would you like to?
I was going to go through to Lexi, but I was going to add on to that. It's one of those beautiful things that we found in the community, that people don't come in with preconceived ideas, but there's been so many connection points that have been made by people coming, sharing, sitting there and talking. And it has been the way of it hasn't become a personality contest, for example. It's just the information, and people want to know more, they want to learn more and connect with others so they improve their way of comprehending things, which I think is marvelous. And again, you're basically saying the same thing, which is what we really are keen on. Lexi?
Okay, sorry, it took me a second. I'm bad at Zoom. But hi Anthony.
Hi, Lexi.
I had a few things to touch on. I'm sorry, I'll try and get through it quick. So when I first started my spiritual studies, the person who I guess I was learning from at the time, I was considered his charge. And anyways, he was like, don't believe what I believe, study, practice, research, find out what you believe. And so I originally was drawn to Greek mythology, and then from a younger age, I had always felt more pulled to Egyptian mythology, which I don't even know if that's the right word I want to be using in this circumstance, but as far as the cultural part of it, as far as what you were saying about the ferryman, the second you started explaining it, popped in my head. Definitely have read about it, and that's something that in this life right now, this realm that I'm in, there's different ways to say it, but me and the Grim Reaper, or me and the ferryman, are old friends at this point in my life. And
it might be worthwhile pointing out to Anthony about the reason you say that, because it is quite pertinent, the fact of your medical condition.
Yeah, of course. So I have actually it's kind of a long story, but I'll try and keep it short. But anyways, when I was young, I was diagnosed at 6 months old. I was in kidney failure, and I was diagnosed with a blood disorder called Henoch-Schönlein purpura. There was only 11 known cases in the world at that point. In the medical books, there was a 4-sentence paragraph on what that is. And so later in life, it's an autoimmune deficiency. So then I ended up with something called dysautonomia, which is a dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system, central nervous system in my brain. So the part of my brain that tells my body to do things naturally, whether it be to feel hunger or to feel like I should use the restroom, or if I'm tired, or like all the things, blinking, yawning, all of it, the things that I'm supposed to do naturally, my body does not do. So that eventually led to me losing consciousness frequently. And I would go from I can go into depth on a more medical standpoint, but that caused me to have a lot of falls, and I would be in the middle of walking, totally healthy, totally fine, no warning, and it would be like a flipped switch in my head where I was completely aware and talking, and unconscious with my head smacked on the pavement. So after 13 diagnoses, or 13 diagnosed concussions and a 3-day coma, they had told me, look, if you hit your head again, there's no saying what's going to happen. And I just grew up in and out of hospitals, and it's been a challenge with a lot of things that I'm doing. But that's the simplest way that I can explain it. That him and I are old friends. Anyways, I'm meant to ask, one of my questions was, when I was doing my studies and stuff, I was wondering what led you to Greek, to the Greek culture more than others per se. And like, that's like, you can hang on, that's just like one of my questions.
Okay. Well,
And you were talking about you called it the Uber
daemon. Yeah, the Uber daemon.
One more time?
Pardon?
Can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, Uber daemon, as in the German over. So Uber is over. And in terms of that model, I will just quickly explain what I mean by that. I argue in my books. I wrote a book in 2008 called The Daemon: A Guide to Your Extraordinary Secret Self. And in this, I suggest that all human beings, we are double beings. That we have our everyday, ordinary self, which I call the eidolon, which exists within linear time and only lives once, only lives one life. Okay. Then there is the daemon, which is what you would understand as being, or many people would understand as being, your spirit guide, your higher self, your over self. And it's something that occurs and has occurred in philosophy and in religious beliefs since the beginning of time. Effectively, people have always been fascinated by this idea that we have something within us that is not us, but is part of us. And I argue that the daemon is the immortal you. It's what some people would call the soul. And it is the daemon that carries through all of your lives, all of the repeats of your lives. It's almost like your game player. You know, imagine that, you know, when you play a computer game, the first time you don't know your way around, you get lost and you have many things. But over a period of time with each of the games in the same environment, you end up with a pretty good idea of where you need to go, where you're going to meet the monsters and everything else to avoid them. And I argue this is what literally happens, that the daemon is your game player. It's the immortal you. And it guides its eidolon through life. Now, going back to your very good question about Greece. Greece is a country that I have visited countless times. I mean, I've only just come back from Greece. I was in Greece for 3 weeks and I only got back last week, going to more and more obscure parts of Greece. And I'm delighted to say that 2 of my books are now out in Greek, with negotiations for a potential 3rd book coming out in Greek, the new book as well. And indeed, myself and a group of associates are planning to do an event in Greece probably next year, where we're going to be recreating Plato's cave. Now, the reason that Greek philosophy intrigues me is that it has some incredible truths within it. For instance, the concept of Plato's cave and the idea that we are existing within some form of simulation. Simulation is the wrong word. In my new book, I use the word instantation, which is more accurate because a simulation suggests that it's a copy of something else, whereas my associate researcher, Dr. Andrew Gallimore, uses the term instantation, and I think it's a far better idea. But Plato argued that everything that we understand and perceive is given to us by our senses. This is how we perceive reality. We never interface directly with external reality. And he used in his, I think it was the 4th book of his series of books, The Republic, he gives an example. He explains to somebody in the book that imagine a situation where there is a group of prisoners that have been kept in a dark cave, with them sitting down, looking at the back wall of the cave. They can't move their heads. All they can do is look at the back wall. And behind them, towards the cave entrance, is a fire. And between the fire and them, there is a walkway. And what happens is that over periods of time, people walk over the walkway and their shadows are reflected on the back wall in front of the prisoners. So all the prisoners see of reality are shadows on a wall. And on the shadows, there'll be people that will walk across the walkway, and they will have cutouts of animals and everything else, and planets and everything else. And the prisoners believe that is reality. Reality is the shadows on the wall, because they've never experienced anything else. But one of the prisoners breaks his shackles, stands up and walks past the fire and walks to the entrance of the cave and sees reality as it really is, and sees the beauty of the sky and everything else as well, goes back to his friends and says, hey guys, what you think is reality isn't. There's shadows on the wall. This is not what is real. And of course they consider him insane. They consider him crazy, and they say, don't be silly, shadows on the wall is what it's all about. There isn't anything else. And I'd argue people who have extraordinary experiences, people who have out-of-the-body experiences, near-death experiences, experiences with entheogens such as DMT, they go to the entrance of the cave and they see reality as it really is, and they come back to tell us what they see. And of course we consider them to be insane, because that's the way we see the world. Now that Plato's cave is so accurate because Plato argued that there is a reality behind this reality, and it's part of Greek myth. The idea is that the world we live within is a facsimile, and this world we live within is what is called the kanoma. It's a false creation, and there is a real reality behind, which they call the pleroma, and the pleroma literally in Greek means fullness. And everything we perceive here are reflections of the real things that are in the pleroma. And these are called Plato's forms, because Plato argued that everything we experience in this world is a reflection of something that exists somewhere else. Now, this idea carried forward to a lot of other religion and belief systems. For instance, the early Christian Gnostics took it on board and considered that this reality that we exist within is a creation of what was called the demiurge. They called it the demiurge, a being called Yaldabaoth. And they argued that Yaldabaoth was the demiurge, which literally means false creator, the half maker. And the idea is that this is not real. We think it's real, but it's not. We're trapped within our meat machines perceiving this. Now, again, if you then move on to, and in the book, in the new book, I take you right through this. So I take you through and I say, well, of course, within the Hindu tradition, we have the concept of Meyer. And Meyer is the concept, again, that this is not real. This is not what it seems. And we are all part of a dream of Brahman, the consciousness of the universe. Now, going back to my daemon eidolon model, what I then argue is that above the daemon and the eidolon is what I was talking about earlier, the collective unconscious, what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious of mankind. I call that the uberdaemon, as I said, but I then argue behind that is an even greater all-encompassing consciousness field, which I call the godemon. And the godemon is effectively what we would call God. It's the consciousness of the whole universe. It is the consciousness field by which this reality, this program, it's where the information comes from to run this program that we exist within. And the ancient Greeks really understood this. And they really were interested in this, and the Greek philosophers. But if you look through, and again in the new book, I take you through, most of the great philosophers were very much taking a very similar position to myself. Even the modern philosophers like Martin Heidegger. But going back to Immanuel Kant and various other philosophers, they very much were on the idea of what is reality? When we say that something is real, what do we mean? When we perceive something out there, what is it really? And of course, modern quantum physics tells us that what we think is reality, and this is science, and this is the exact figure. The chair you are sitting on is 99.9999999999996 empty space. That is a fact. And the bits of solid somethings that are left in all that are the quarks, and there are 6 of them, and photons and electrons. Photons and quarks are what's called point particles. It means they have no extension in space. They are literally, however much you zoom in, they're just a point. And everything we perceive is made up of the interactions of these fleeting objects that sometimes are particles, they're sometimes waves, depending on whether we observe them or not. The universe is an incredibly complex and incredibly fascinating place. But believe me, when you think something is solid in front of you, it's not. The only reason your bottom doesn't fall through the chair is something called electrostatic repulsion, because it means that the electrons at the edge of the atoms of your bottom and the electrons at the edge of the atoms in your chair are both the same charge. And we know that like charges repulse. So effectively what's happening is it's like an electromagnetic field that you hover above. You never ever touch anything. So when people say, I touch my lover's skin, or I taste some food, no, you don't. You never interact with anything. We are all stuck within these little electrostatic bubbles. That's what reality really is, and that's what science tells us reality is. And this is what the ancient Greeks knew, and what a lot of the ancient philosophies knew. And this is the area that we need to be moving into to understand. In my new book, I really go into this in great detail. I hope that explained it. Is that, Lexi, is that okay?
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, I'm right on board with that. Like I said, back when I started my studies, I read a lot of books, and I come from the same exact belief system as far as what you were talking about, as far as, like you said, nothing is not necessarily real, but it's not, it's, it's not there. I don't know, you explained it very well.
Yeah, it's not, what I would argue is it's not what it seems.
Right, there you go.
Whatever it
Okay.
is, I have a term, I call it electromagnetic chauvinism. And by that I mean that we assume that everything we see through our eyes is a direct one-to-one relationship with what is out there, when in fact all that's happening is that the electromagnetic waves of a certain vibrationary state and a certain wavelength are interpreted as being the color green, and certain other ones are interpreted as being the color red. But green and red objectively do not exist. They are literally what's called qualia. This is something that the brain interprets that particular frequency as being that color. But color exists nowhere. There is no color. And there's also an argument to say that even depth is an illusion. There is no space. Because if you think about it, and philosophers have thought about this for hundreds of years, if there were no objects in space, no planets or stars, what would happen to the space? Because space is literally nothing, philosophically and scientifically. But of course, we now know from modern science that in fact space is far from empty. There's something called the 0-point field. There's the quantum vacuum. It's full of particles we can't perceive that pop in and out of reality. And going back to the ancient Greek myth, what did I say earlier? That the pleroma is called the fullness. And this is because in some way the ancient Greeks knew about 0-point energy, the 0-point field, and the quantum vacuum. And they said the reality behind the reality is the information that is held within the quantum vacuum. This is what we are perceiving. We are perceiving literally an information field. Everything is digital, everything is mathematical. And our brain creates this reality around us for us to perceive within it. Just like a sprite on your computer screen when Lara Croft runs through Angkor Wat on the computer game, you're perceiving what she perceives. And we all know they're just bits of information. There's no depth, there's no monsters, there's no anything. It is just information. Lexi, thank you. Right, anybody else? Next question?
Before we get on to the next question, I know that you had an 11 o'clock time dead point, but we're now past that. Where is the cutoff point so we make sure we get through the questions that we have up?
How do you mean? Oh, what time we want to finish?
Well, we were going to finish at 11, but obviously it's now 17 minutes past.
Right. No. Let's go through. We can go
okay,
through.
Excellent. Fred?
Sounds like this is more than 40 minutes, so I appreciate it. I think the fact that you mentioned like video games, like third-person games, that's my foundational viewpoint on the world. I've always felt a very strong connection to playing video games since I was younger. It's probably one of the easiest ways for me to find joy, and it's not just like the mind-numbing whatever everyone wants to say about it. Like for me it's special. Like there's people that spend their time and they put their soul into these video games, you know. I'm not talking about the games where you just like murder people and whatever, you know, but like there's so many special games, and I've always felt that connection. And you talking about that specifically, you said, you know, we're working towards our way to have a perfect life, and that's one of the things that has been following me recently is you know, like the Goldilocks effect with the world or whatever. I forgot what it's called, but yeah,
so the cosmic anthropic principle is the thing behind the
yeah,
Goldilocks enigma, which I talk about in the new book extensively.
Awesome. So that's how I've been identifying my life. Is I've been doing some personal inventory, and I basically came to the conclusion that my life is exactly where, like, what it needs to be, how it needs to be, like everything happens for a reason. And I feel like I've fully aligned, maybe not fully, but I've definitely aligned myself to a point where I feel like I'm in tune with either my higher self or the world or whatever, you know, like there's so many synchronicities on my day-to-day life at this point that I kind of just had to surrender to it. And I was just kind of curious, like what you're mentioning the higher self. So for me personally, like I've been going through my spiritual journey, and I actually had a communion today with, you know, my higher self or God or whatever. That's kind of what I'm trying to figure out right now is when I have those communion sessions, you know, like the easiest way to say it is like my antenna goes off, you know, like my third eye or whatever anyone wants to call it. You know, I feel a sensation at the crown of my head, and then I get the pulsations on my at the front of my forehead. And so basically what I use that for is for confirmation during our conversations. And I've been going through this internal struggle personally, with good and evil or whatever. And I came to the conclusion during this communion is that what if that's such a perverted sense of what it actually is, you know, like what if it's such a programmed thing that, you know, God and the devil or whatever are separate entities, when at the end of the day, they're the same. And so for me personally, I know this is recorded, but I've partaken in a lot of psychedelics, and I've had a bunch of different experiences. And for me, music has been the biggest way to connect with either my higher self or, you know, whatever. It's a vehicle to access different things, you know. And personally, I feel like I'm not sure if I'm tapping into, you know, quote unquote God or the devil. And that's kind of what I'm trying to discern for myself. And so I feel like that's kind of my life journey, is to settle the conflict within myself that has been I guess integrated through, you know, like you said, personal experiences, family, like all that. And yeah, I was just kind of curious, like if you speak about that on the sense of the duality, and if it's really not a duality, maybe it's just all like, I don't want to say it's all a farce, you know, but at this point I'm just growing into a really big skeptic at this point, and the only thing that I can verify are my own experiences and everyone else's experiences, you know.
Well, I think ultimately, I mean, wow, fantastic series of observations and thoughts there, by the way. And in terms of the perception or anticipation of one's own higher self, I'm sure that Paul would agree here that hopefully this afternoon we'll be joined by Myron Dial, who has been a friend of mine ever since my first book. And
I have to say to you, Anthony, Fred, Lexi and Myro and Ian have met, and Brad, Alexi there as well, have met Myron for many hours and spoken to him and listened to him, so they know the connection of how much information he has.
Wonderful, because, you know, with his experiences with Charon, who is his daemon, it is self-evident that there is something going on here. But I think in terms of the deeper philosophical aspects here of what exactly is taking place, you know, we're all on our own spiritual journey. And that's the magical thing about what I would say Cheating the Ferryman is, that Cheating the Ferryman is part of my own spiritual journey, to understand where I am within the overall universe and the point of what I am. because you guys probably don't know, but I'm in my late 60s now. And over the years, I've been fascinated by what exactly am I needing to achieve. Now, one could argue that, if you wanted to take a purely scientific viewpoint on this and to say that we are just links in a genetic chain, that's all we are. We are tools by which DNA reproduces itself. Or we are just carriers of the microbes and things within our bodies. We are all communities in one way or another. But of course, we all know that's not true. We all know that, as I said in the book, and in the introduction to the book, you might be interested, I have an essay, a short essay really, and in it I describe the three options that you have in terms of life after death. And one of the options is the materialist reductionist worldview, which is literally that we are just nothing. We, as I said, in the vastness of time and space, something experienced something for an infinitesimally small amount of time and disappeared. It hadn't existed for billions of years, and it will not exist for billions of years. And to me, that makes no real sense. It just doesn't. I mean, it means that nature and the universe is just blind, and it's got no purpose to it. It's just a mechanism that just runs on itself. Now, that makes no sense. It makes no sense for me for one important purpose, that if evolution was just literally that, why did it evolve self-referential consciousness? We could easily function effectively without having any inner life, without ever feeling that we are something, perceiving something. And self-referential means, the fact that I know that I know that I know that I'm something, rather than a lower level of I know I'm something and I need to react against these circumstances. I feel pain, so I need to shirk away from it. It's more than that. And of course, this was in, I think, 1995. David Chalmers, an Australian philosopher, stood up at the University of Arizona and said the hard problem of science is how does inanimate matter within the brain create consciousness? How does it create you and I? And of course, there are people called eliminative materialists, people like Daniel Dennett and the Churchlands, who will argue that we are fooling ourselves into even thinking we are conscious, that we're not really. It's a kind of I don't know, a smoke and mirrors game. But all I've argued in the past is that, that you can't fool something that is unthinking, because you can't. In other words, you have to be reflective to be fooled into thinking something, if my logic makes sense to you. You can't just be fooled unless something in there is thinking about being fooled. So clearly there is something to life. And we see it, don't we? We see synchronicities in life, and we meet people in our lives that we resonate with, that we feel that I've known you before, I've known you through decades, through many lives. And of course, so much poetry and literature is based upon this very idea that, that we are not singular people, that we are in somewhere collective, and we're somewhere, something greater is inside of us all. And again, in Gnostic philosophy, there is the idea of that within each of us is, I mentioned the pleroma and the kenoma. And the argument is that within each of us, there is a shard, a little bit of the pleroma. And that, I would argue, is the daemon. And that is the part of you that yearns for greater knowledge. That is the part of you that just knows and senses that you're something more. And I would argue that's the part of you that interfaces with the daemon. Now, again, in a previous book, I'd argued that I think where that interface takes place is the pineal gland in the brain. And it was interesting before the comment made about the Kundalini experience, the feeling that there's something in the center of your forehead or at the back of your forehead, that when you have these altered states of consciousness coming upon you. I argue that this is because the pineal gland at that point is generating endogenous dimethyltryptamine. It's synthesizing melatonin into what an associate of mine has called metatonin, which is effectively endogenous DMT. And as Rick Strassman has argued, the great researcher into dimethyltryptamine, has argued that DMT is our reality modulator. This is what projects outwards the reality that we perceive. So there's some very interesting things here. But just I've noticed Alexei has asked, about Rebecca Sharrock with her highly superior autobiographical memory. Yes, as Paul has quite rightly said, I interviewed Rebecca a few months ago, and yes, I would argue that she is in contact with her daemon. The doors of perception, which again refers to another of my earlier books, Opening the Doors of Perception, are actually open more, and her daemon consciousness leaks through into her eidolonic consciousness. And in fact, if any of you are interested, one of the most extraordinary things I ever have done live on a broadcast was that Rebecca has superior autobiographical memory, which means effectively she forgets nothing. And when we were doing the live interview, myself and my assistant Sarah, we decided to test her. We weren't going to tell her we were going to do this. And halfway through, Sarah's daughter is a great fan of Harry Potter, and so is Rebecca. So what I said was, and I got Sarah to just open a page at random of one of the Harry Potter books, and there's numerous ones of them. Select a page at random and start reading it. And I challenged Rebecca to finish the sentence. We got 4 words in, and she read in her mind's eye the whole paragraph. That was me proof of the power of the human mind, or the power of our ability to link in to the data field in one way or another. That we did live. And again, if you go onto my YouTube channel, I extracted that particular section and placed it on there. It is absolutely extraordinary. Right, okay, that's that. So any next questions?
Well, I have to say that when you're talking about people getting together and realizing that they're meant to be there at the right time, again, just as an example, our community is finding that as well. There are so many people that are always coming back and bringing information, and it really does feel like you've known them for ages. And it is a peculiar sensation, because when you meet someone for the first time, you've always got that what are they after kind of feeling. But after a while, with all the people that are coming in, helping out, expanding the information, bringing new topics, it doesn't feel like that at all. I mean, so you're like Fred, Lexi, Ian, Myro, Ian, and also, again, Alexei. We're all going through that here now, and we've done that for many hours.
Well, I think it's similar, isn't it, Paul? That you and I met at random, and you just have these linkages with certain people. And I find that over the period of time, the nearly 2 decades that I've been involved in doing this work now, that there's a very small percentage of people that really get it. And when they really get it, we become very close. And it's as if we are self-selecting ourselves for something. And I don't know what that is. And you and I have discussed this, I know, and various other people I'm involved with have said this, that it's as if we have something we have to achieve. And I don't know what it is. And it's as if our daemons are screaming at us going, come on, guys, you have to do something extraordinary here. You have the potential to do it. And all the time you keep thinking to your daemon, can you be a bit more clear? I was talking to a friend of mine about this recently, and she and I were discussing this. And I said, it's rather like our daemons are screaming at us to do things. And I was reminded, and I explained it to her. I don't know if any of you guys remember the very early Steve Martin film, The Jerk.
That is a superb film. And also the fact where they're shooting all the cans.
And his special purpose, he has a special purpose. But it was I think that's the film, isn't it, with Kathleen Turner, where she
No, that's The Man with Two Brains.
Oh, sorry, it's The Man with Two Brains. You're right, it is, isn't it?
With a brain in the jar. Amel Mahey.
Mahel Mahey, that's right. And Dr. Verver. And in it, there's a sequence where he's turning around and saying, he's setting up with the Kathleen Turner character and his ex-wife, and he's saying, give me a sign that this relationship is wrong. And her portrait is spinning on the wall, and there's these screaming sounds, and there's poltergeist activity everywhere. And he just turns around and he says, oh, well, no, well, obviously it's fine. You know, and I sometimes feel the daemon is like that, where the daemon is going, for God's sake, you stupid Eidolons, why can't you see this? But I think collectively, and I've used the analogy many times, I think there will be an event we will all get together, and it's like a huge jigsaw puzzle, and each of us will carry a piece, and we'll walk into the room and we'll put and contribute our little bit, and the jigsaw puzzle will fall into place. And I'd like to think that's the moment that possibly we break out of the matrix. I'd like to believe that anyway.
Yeah, that's great. Also, Lexi has got another question. I don't know if Fred's just got his hand up or not. Was that just keeping up there, was it?
Yeah, sorry, I took it down because I didn't know how you guys were doing on time. I just sorry, you've talked about a lot, and I'm very grateful to be speaking to someone of, you know, this knowledge. And Paul brought up an amazing point that, you know, when we all get together, we all have these connections and these experiences to share together, and that is one of the most beautiful things that I love about this space. But going on further, when you were talking about the how we are, you know, there's our immortal selves, right, our souls, and you had brought up certain experiences with dimethyltryptamine, and one of the experiences that I had, actually one time, and then the other time I was on a different psychedelic, but basically I was in a crowd of people, actually both times, which it wasn't until the second experience that I had that I understood the first time I had experienced DMT. And anyways, so both times I had seen, I'm just going to talk about this second. I was at this music festival, and you know, obviously there's a lot of frequencies and a lot of people, and anyways, above me there was like a web, like I don't know how to say it better than like a web, and then at each point of every little square of the web, if that makes sense, or diamond, or however you want to, anyways. So for every square at every point was a soul. So it's like we were all like fabricated, like sorry, words are hard sometimes because brain damage and whatnot. Anyways, so our souls were each of the middle points of like each little each point on this web that had covered us, right? So then there was like a tether to us up, and the fact that all of those souls were connected. When you were talking about past lives, or people being able to experience either other people's you know, their experiences, or their you know, tapping into that, it made a lot of sense to me that with that web, and with us being the point, that there are all sorts of roads to travel, and that we would be able to have access to that, as we are all connected through that immortal, like as humans, as our souls exist, like it makes sense that we would be able to experience either other people's memories, or I'm not going to say, but I don't, past lives is not, I don't know how to feel about using that specifically, because I've had a lot of experiences where things have felt like me, where I was an orca, like, and I was actually the orca. And I've had a lot of different experiences with that, but it just reminded me of the web, and us being the point, and being able to travel through that web, and then, you know, being connected to other souls. That made sense to me. So
Can I just jump in here? I'm
yeah.
just going to put my camera on for a second, because I want to show you an extraordinary synchronicity that just took place. If I can find my video, here we go. Okay. that was sitting right in front of me.
Yeah, interesting orca. Yeah.
Wow.
That is just the kind of extraordinary. I'm sorry about that, but I just wanted to.
Just to add to your synchronicity of synchronicities, yesterday I sent a photo of basically a relative, but there was 2 dogs either side of my relative, but behind her was a silver statue that you get as a shop dummy for a window, but it was painted silver, but the face was gold. And I was talking to a friend of mine and about what we were doing, and I sent this photo, and they went, "Oh my God." And again, I think you know Stephanie Quick, Anthony, and a few other people do in here from her conversation. She was talking to somebody about star signs, and she was talking about someone sent that the sun would be between 2 Sirius dog stars, and the connection of 2 dogs either side, and the fact that she was taking the doll's face with the gold color of the sun there, and that was being another connection which she picked up on. So there's some really strange syncs that can happen very quickly.
Rooted synchronicities, isn't it? Which is the argument that camera, I think, came up with. But going back then to Lexi's comments, there was a lot there that I'd like to unpick. The first thing is the image that you saw. In my new book, I have a section on what's called Indira's Web. And Indira's Web is the god, one of the gods of Vedanta is Indira. Indra. And Indra has a web. And it's like a web of intersecting lines. And in the corner of each web is the same jewel. And this is the infinite universe. And it's the way in which the Vedantists are arguing that everything at the lower level is connected. And in the book, I discuss in great detail about how that can be referenced to holography and holograms, and the way in which, for instance, if you take a holographic image and you smash it, what you will find is that each individual piece will not be like the piece of a jigsaw puzzle, which will have a unique part of the overall image, but it will have a denuded image of the whole image. So the whole is contained in the parts, and the parts is contained in the whole. So this effectively means that if the universe is holographic, and there is more and more information from black hole theory, by the way, and from people like Stephen Hawking and Juan Baldacana and various really top researchers, Jacob Bekenstein, the late Jacob Bekenstein, all these people argue something called the holographic principle, and the idea that the universe is holographic in nature. Now, this would explain one of the great mysteries of quantum physics, which is called non-locality. And it's the idea, well, it's not the idea, it's been proven. It was proven in 1981 by Alain Aspect and a guy called Dalibard in Paris, where they proved scientifically that this was a fact. But if you take 2 subatomic particles and you put them in the same quantum state, and then you move that subatomic particle to technically the other side of the universe, if you do something to the initial particle, the other one reacts instantaneously. Now, this effectively means that there's some form of communication at a lower level of reality that we don't understand. And this is something that Professor David Bohm, who was an Anglo-American physicist at Birkbeck College in the 1970s, called wholeness and the implicate order. And the idea is that at a deeper level of reality, everything is a singularity, which is what has been argued by a lot of ancient religions. The idea is that we are all one consciousness, and we are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. And I believe that singular consciousness is what I call the Godamon. And again, a very famous quote by Bill Hicks, the American comedian. He did a very famous monologue, which he did many, many times. Again, you can check it, just check it up on YouTube, where he turns around and he's pretending it's a TV news channel. And he said, breaking news, young man on acid discovers that we are all one, that matter is just light slowed down to walking speed, and that we are one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. Now over to Bill for the weather. Very, very good monologue, and incredibly important, because again, this is a statement that we know instinctively. You know, it's something in our heart of hearts, maybe that shard of the pleroma that's inside us, maybe it's the daemon talking to us, but we all know that we are part of something much greater. Now, again, going back to what was said earlier, this idea of sensing a greater something, as if you're part of a bigger world, you feeling that you are part of the orca. If you go on to my YouTube channel, I interviewed somebody I've featured in a couple of my books, who had a near-death experience dying of hypothermia in the sea off Dawlish in the English Channel in 1999, Bill Murtha. And when Bill was dying of hypothermia, one of the effects he described to me was that he felt that as he was drowning and as he was losing consciousness, he realized he was the seagulls that were flying above him. He was the water around him. He was the cliffs in the distance. He was everything. He was part of it all. Now, again, I mentioned earlier on Peter Ouspensky, the Russian philosopher, and he was sailing across the Sea of Azov many, many years ago, the 1920s probably. And he had that kind of moment of realization that he was everything and everything was him. And it's sometimes we get this, don't we? Again, Wordsworth, in his famous poem, Lines Written a Few Miles Above Tintern Abbey, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he says that there is that something, that sublime something that's inside of us all, that we see occasionally in the light of setting suns, that kind of shiver up your spine when your pineal gland is linking up with something greater. And we realize that there's much more to this than our modern science is telling us. It's not saying that modern science is wrong, it's brilliant, but it's not a complete picture. It is nowhere near a complete picture. Quantum physics is telling us this. So it's this singular consciousness. And again, I'd like to make the final point. One of my favorite lines over the years that I came across was I think from a poem, and I know it was a song, and it was I know an Australian band called Little River Band did this line in one of their songs. But there are many paths up the mountain, but the view from the top is still the same. And I think that's what we're all doing. We're all wandering around up this mountain, and we're going to get to the top, and we're going to go, wow, that's it. And I'd like to finally think that probably in about 523 BC, some old man was waking up in ancient Egypt, decided he'd found the secret of life and promptly died. And I'd like to believe that probably at the point of death is when we all realise that. When our daemon manifests in our lives, when we're having a near-death experience and the daemon comes to you, the being of light, and it will turn round to you and it will say, I'm going to take you through your life now. And I think that's genuinely what happens. And then as a final point, when we were discussing earlier on about Tibetan Buddhism, and of course we have the Bardo state within Tibetan Buddhism, which is the idea that there is a place we go between life and death where we live our lives again. And of course it's exactly what it says in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. These are all greater truths. My work is not unique, nor is it original. The only originality in my work is I'm applying the science to it. But we all instinctively know this is right. The amount of TV series we see. I don't know if anybody's seen the new British TV series, Life After Life. If you want to check that out and read my books, you'll go, wow, this book is discussing Anthony Peake's ideas. But then again, there have been movies in the past that have done this. I'll give one example, Vanilla Sky. I'll give another example, Butterfly Effect. All of these are in the zeitgeist. These are things that we know. We instinctively know them to be correct. It's just we're blinded by other belief systems. But I believe this is the ultimate truth. I've always argued that I believe this is the Holy Grail. I believe that these two things that I write about in my books, the idea we live our lives again, and the daemon eidolon dyad, the duality of human consciousness, is what the Cathars died for in the 13th century with the Albigenesian heresy. I believe that's what the Parfait, who were the people who were the inner people within that religious group, knew. And I believe that this is the belief system of a lot of occult groups. You talk to people in occult groups, they will all say, what's it all about? It's to get to communion with your own God within, your own higher self, your daemon. And that's what I suggest anyway. Right, any other questions, thoughts, observations?
There's going to be lots of them, I feel, but obviously I'd like to test after we finish this to make sure that this afternoon is correct and goes well. But we're taking any more quick questions if there's anything else that's going on. Raising hands, come off mic.
My last question is super quick.
Fire away.
So you had talked about scientifically I don't know, I don't want to misquote because that's my short-term memory is not the best, but you were talking about scientifically how a lot of like your, not that your spirituality is lined up with that per se, but I guess my question was, do you think that, as far as obviously the limitations of where our scientific knowledge is at this point, do you believe that spiritually there are some things that cannot be defined within a scientific manner?
Yeah, I agree. I think that there are things that our intellect, our brains are just not programmed to understand them. It's like the things we're discovering now in quantum mechanics and cosmology. We can do the experiments and we can see the data and we can see what the data is telling us. But what we don't have is the ability to then extrapolate as to what they really mean. For instance, at the present moment in time, there is a huge conflict in science. The mathematical equations that are used for quantum mechanics do not work when you plug them into relativity. So it means we have two forms of science, both of which are tremendously successful, but there's a contradiction within them, which we cannot understand. And modern scientists, when they turn around and they, Brian Cox, the UK scientist, is a classic example of this, of hubris, where he makes out, we're virtually there, we know everything. That is exactly what the scientists thought in the late 1890s with regards to our scientific understanding. And of course, what happened in December 1900, a 42-year-old German physicist called Max Planck stood up in Berlin and made a statement about something called black body radiation. And without going into detail, effectively what he suggested was that energy comes in little packets or quanta, and that started the quantum revolution. And suddenly everything changed. Suddenly what the scientists in the 1890s thought the world was completely, well, it wasn't completely wrong, but they'd only got part of the picture. And I suspect that there will be the same thing happening soon when we will make discoveries. I mean, for instance, a lot of the things now of the James Webb Telescope, the photographs we're discovering now in terms of that, these are all opening up bigger questions. And every civilization has always thought that their science is the pinnacle of understanding. I don't see why we are any different. Our science is no more. There are problems with science. There are things we do not understand, and we are not even at first base of understanding how consciousness occurs. So we have got a great deal to learn. But the question is, will we ever be able to understand what we do? A lot of scientists have something called promissory materialism, which is the idea that we do not understand these things at the moment, but in the future we will. Well, sorry, we don't know that. We cannot make those statements. All we can do is to try and just look at the facts as they stand. And most importantly, science cannot just dismiss things because they can't explain them. Just because science can't explain telepathy doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Just because science can't explain out-of-body experiences doesn't mean they don't happen. It's just that science is refusing to acknowledge them because they haven't got the framework to explain them. So what we do is we should look at these anomalous situations as science should do. Look at your white crows or your black swans and look at them and say, this is where the proof of the future science is going to be, explaining that, not explaining the things that are easy, but explaining the things that don't fit in. And I think that is the future of science.
Definitely. Just got 2 last questions and then we can go from there. Spiral, nice to see that you could join us from Twitter Space.
Hey, thank you. And actually, it's not a question. I just wanted to thank Anthony and you, Paul, for this great talk. I fell upon your spaces, your perceptions in Twitter, and I've been enjoying everything that I've experienced so far. So thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you, Spiral.
Oh, thank you very much. I mean, as I said before, and it will always be the same way, that it's the community and the sharing of knowledge and helping each other is the great thing. From the people that have been getting involved, they go out, they go into other communities, they help share out there, and they come back and they also help each other out in other areas. And it's just fantastic to see that. And the other question which we have is from Alexei. And he says that Philip K. Dick wrote he experienced being in the Roman Empire. And also Young wrote that he experienced he was suddenly in the Middle Ages, similar to the Tennant Nolan film.
Right, yeah, Philip K. Dick's quite interesting. Yeah, as you probably know, I think I'm the person that wrote the latest biography of Philip K. Dick. And the book is actually called Philip K. Dick, The Man That Remembered the Future. And I have an extensive section on Philip K. Dick's belief. He had an experience called 2374, which took place in February and March 1974, where he had what he called a theophany, which was a kind of his mind opening to God, for want of a better term. And he came to the conclusion that time had stopped in 70 AD at the destruction of the temple by the Romans after the Jewish wars, and that he was interfacing his mind with a man who was living in 70 AD, and that time had stopped since then. And ever since then, we were existing in a veneer of reality that was an illusion. Fascinating stuff. And also, yes, Jung's experience, where he had a time slip, and Toynbee was somebody else. Arnold Toynbee had a time slip in Greece many years ago, the historian. And I myself have experienced such a time slip, and this is a genuine story. I was traveling in Turkey, 1984, and I was in a place called Miletus, which is an ancient Greek city on the coastline of the Asia Minor Aegean coastline. But because of silting up, the city that was a coastal city is about 6 or 7 miles inland, in a river valley called the Menderus River Valley. The Menderus River is an amazing river, and it's where the word meander comes from, because it meanders down this river valley. And I broke away from the small group I was with because I was feeling quite strange. And I sat on the roof of an old mosque, deserted mosque. And I was looking out over the Menderus River Valley, and there were a couple of hills in the distance. And suddenly the air around me was electric. I'm not making this up, this really did happen. The air around me was electric, and I felt the hairs on the back of my head go up. And there was a kind of crackling in the air. And suddenly everything shimmered around me. And what I thought were hills in the valley became islands, and they were surrounded by sea. And there were 2 little islands off the coast. And the river valley was full of water. And I swear that as I looked at the edge of one of the islands, I saw the prow of a trireme, the Greek boat, come out from the corner, the ones that have the hooked front, and then it all shimmered and it disappeared again. Now, I found that extraordinarily strange, but what is even stranger is that 3 months later, I was reading a travel review in the Sunday Times magazine in the UK, or the Sunday Times paper, and the guy was writing about Miletus, and he turned around and he said he had experienced an extraordinary time slip there. So it wasn't just me. So somebody else had had a similar time slip. And it's the idea that there is a reality. Again, I keep citing books I've written because I've written so many books about so many subjects. But I wrote a book called The Labyrinth of Time. And I discussed the idea, and it's not unique, and Philip K. Dick again came up with it. He called it orthogonal time. The idea that there's a time that runs at right angles to this time. So every moment at this time is a right angle time that is the permanent present, where past, present and future all exist in the same instant. and that time overlaps each other. Again, the writings of J.W. Dunn with his serial time is another example of this. So the idea is that time is not what it seems. And again, as a final point in my new book, I take the ideas of a guy called John Kramer. Professor John Kramer has something called a transactional analysis of quantum physics. And in this, Kramer argues, he doesn't argue, this is true, there are two forms of waves. There are what's called advanced waves and retarded waves. Now, effectively, advanced waves are going forwards in time, and retarded waves, I think it's right, I might have got it the wrong way around there, are going backwards in time. So this means that the waves of time are going in opposite directions, which effectively means that when a retarded wave hits an advanced wave, they call what's called an interference pattern. This is my hypothesis, not his, that it causes an interference pattern, like a hologram. And I argue that the point that the advanced waves and the retarded waves come together is the present moment. And it is created millisecond by millisecond in slices of time. And it's again applying the ideas of Einstein's mathematical teacher, Hermann Minkowski, who came up with something called block time. Now, again, if you want to go onto my Facebook wall, I posted something about block time because somebody's posted something, an article that's been published in the last couple of days. I've been writing about block time for the last 2 decades. And sometimes I do get quite frustrated that I'm writing about this stuff and nobody's listening to me. One day they will. Probably way after I'm gone and I'm running through another run in the Bohmian IMAX. But I really am joining the dots here. You know, it really is quite interesting stuff. So I'm aware, Paul, that, you know, we're now running out of time. I presume there's no more questions.
It looks like we're okay here. That means I can thank you very much for your time, and we can check for the next actual session later on to make sure all the technical difficulties are ironed out, which would be good.
Could we do it on this again, or would that not work?
I've set everything up, and anybody who's looked in the last 5 days is going to kind of find it.
Okay, well, let's make it work. Okay, everybody, thank you very much. You're spending your time with me and you're investing your time listening to what I've got to say and listening to Paul as well. So I thank you as well for your interest in my work. And please, 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 the only way my work is going to get out there is people talk about it, tell their friends, talk about
subscribe
it.
Subscribe to your YouTube channel.
Please, please. I'm not a world famous writer. My publisher is very, very good, but they're not a massive publisher. The marketing has to be done from the people who are interested in my work, because we need to change this. And the only way we can change it is by people actually reading what I write. Thank you very much. Thanks. And thanks again, Paul, again.
Well, thank you very much. And obviously I'll contact you straight after this to make sure we can sort this one out very quickly.
Yeah.
And everybody else, thank you very much for turning up.
See you all later. Okay then.
Yes.
Bye.
Speak to you then.
Yeah, bye.
And I will see you all soon. Thank you very much for turning up for part 1. Part 2 should be less technical issues.